What would you do if your dead brother came home? It's past midnight. You're alone. And you hear his voice outside your door. But here's the thing. You buried him 2 years ago. And tonight he wants to come in. Asterisk. It was a quiet night. Too quiet. Laura sat alone in the living room, the only light coming from her phone screen. The rest of the house was dark. Outside, the streets were silent. No cars, no voices, nothing. She scrolled lazily through her feed, trying to distract herself from the uneasy feeling she'd had all evening. The old wall clock ticked loudly, each second echoing through the room. It was almost midnight. Then knock, knock, knock. The sound made her freeze. It wasn't the quick tapping of a stranger. This was slow, heavy, and deliberate, the kind of knock she'd heard 1,000 times before. Her chest tightened. That knock sounded like her brother Daniel. But that was impossible. Daniel had been dead for 2 years. She sat frozen on the couch, her phone still in her hand but her fingers unable to move. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was just the wind rattling something outside. She tried to convince herself, but then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder. Her mouth went dry. She didn't want to stand up, but something in her body moved her feet toward the door. Slowly, step by step, she approached it, each creak of the floor making her feel more exposed. Laura. She froze mid-step. The voice came from outside the door. Deep, familiar, and trembling, but unmistakable. It was Daniel's voice. Her eyes filled with tears before she even realized it. She wanted to run, to hide, to pretend she didn't hear it, but her legs wouldn't move. Laura, open the door, it's me. Her mind was spinning. She remembered the funeral, the coffin, the soil falling over it. She had touched his cold hand one last time before they buried him. And yet his voice was here. Right now. Her hand hovered near the door handle, trembling. Part of her wanted to open it. Part of her felt if she did she would never be the same again. Laura's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stood frozen, inches from the door, her trembling fingers still hovering above the handle. On the other side, the voice came again, softer this time. Laura, please. I'm cold. It was Daniel. She knew that voice better than her own. The way he dragged out her name, the slight rasp in his tone, it was all there. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, it's not real. It can't be real. But the voice didn't stop. You're my sister. You won't leave me out here, will you? Her throat tightened. She remembered Daniel's laugh, the way he used to knock on her door when they were kids just to annoy her. She remembered the hospital, the flat, unblinking eyes, the way the doctor said, I'm sorry. And now his voice was here. Laura dared herself to peek. She tiptoed to the side window, careful not to make a sound. Pulling the curtain just an inch, she saw a man standing in the dark. His head was lowered, his hair messy, wet from the mist. Daniel? She whispered without thinking. The figure looked up slowly. Her stomach dropped. It was him. Same eyes, same scar on his cheek. But his skin was pale, almost gray, and his lips were cracked like he hadn't had water in weeks. A weak smile formed on his face. See? It's me. Let me in. Her hand shook as she held the curtain. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her screamed to open the door. But another part, the part that remembered the grave, told her that whatever was standing outside was not her brother. Laura's breath fogged the glass as she stayed frozen at the window. Daniel stood just a few feet away, the dim streetlight barely touching his face. The shadows made him look taller, thinner than she remembered. He tilted his head, almost like he was studying her. You've grown your hair longer, he said softly, his lips curling into a strange, uneven smile. Her stomach twisted. He was noticing things about her, details just like he used to. But every part of her body screamed that this was wrong. Laura's fingers gripped the curtain tighter. "Daniel, how are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. His head dropped again, his shoulders rising and falling as if he was breathing too slowly. Finally, he said, "It doesn't matter. I'm back now. Let me in." She swallowed hard. In her mind, she could still see the day they buried him. The coffin, the dirt, the cold air. This wasn't possible. And yet his voice, his face, his presence felt so real. The air outside seemed unnaturally still. Even the crickets had gone silent. Daniel stepped closer to the window. That's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. His clothes were damp, stained with patches of dark soil. Her eyes widened. "Daniel, where have you been?" He looked right at her, his smile gone now. His pupils seemed darker, almost swallowing the whites of his eyes. "Home," he said. "Where else?" For a moment, she thought she saw his lips twitch. Not like a normal smile, but like something was stretching the skin from the inside. Laura backed away from the window, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts. She didn't know what terrified her more, that it might not be Daniel, or that it actually was. Laura's feet moved on their own, carrying her from the window toward the front door. Not to open it, but to see him more clearly through the narrow strip of glass beside the frame. The porch light flickered as she peered out. Daniel was standing directly in front of the door now, closer than before, his face only inches away from the glass. She sucked in a sharp breath. It was Daniel. Every detail was exactly as she remembered. The small scar along his cheekbone. The way his right eyebrow lifted slightly when he looked at her. But there was something wrong. His skin wasn't just pale. It was the color of wet ash. His lips were dry and cracked, and the corners were stained with something dark. A shiver crawled down her spine. "Laura," he whispered, so close to the glass she could almost feel his breath. Except there was none. No folk. No words. Nothing. Her mind fought against what her eyes were telling her. He can't be here. He can't. Daniel tilted his head again, pressing his palm flat against the glass. That's when she noticed his fingernails, longer than they should be. The edges blackened as if burned or rotted. She stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. His expression changed. His soft smile was gone, replaced by something hollow, almost hungry. "I came all this way for you," he said, his voice lower now, heavier, almost vibrating through the door. "Don't make me wait outside." Laura's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She didn't know if she was more afraid of opening the door, or of what might happen if she didn't. Laura's back pressed against the wall. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and fast. Outside, Daniel's voice softened again, almost breaking. "Laura, please. I'm so cold." It was the kind of tone he used when he really needed her help. The same tone he used when they were kids and he'd get locked out of the house by accident. But this wasn't the front yard on a sunny afternoon. This was the middle of the night. And Daniel had been in the ground for 2 years. "I can't," she whispered, not sure if she was saying it to him or to herself. "You can," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm your brother. I don't belong out here." Her stomach twisted. Something about the way he said "out here" made it sound like he wasn't talking about the street. Laura's eyes flicked to the side window. Through the glass, she saw him still standing at the door, unmoving, except for a faint, jerky shiver running through his body, like his bones were cold all the way through. "Just open the door," he continued, almost pleading now. "It's only me. Don't you miss me?" Her throat felt tight. She did miss him. She missed him every single day. And that was the dangerous part, because if she let her heart decide, the lock would already be turning. But then she noticed something that made her skin crawl. His mouth had stopped moving, yet she still heard his voice. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. Laura's head snapped toward the sound. The voice was in her ear now, deep and low, even though Daniel was still outside the door. Her skin prickled as she slowly turned back to the narrow window. Daniel was closer than before, so close his forehead almost touched the glass. Then slowly his hand came up and pressed flat against it. Laura's stomach dropped. His fingers were long, too long, the nails a dark, unhealthy color. The tips scraped lightly against the glass, making a faint, high-pitched sound that set her teeth on edge. "See," he whispered. "I'm real. You can touch me." Her breath caught. She stepped back without meaning to, her heel hitting the edge of the rug. Daniel's head tilted, his eyes locked on hers through the thin barrier. "You're shaking," he said softly. "I remember when you used to hold my hand. You never let go." Laura's chest felt tight. She wanted to scream at him to stop, but she couldn't. There was something magnetic about the way he stared at her. Something that made her legs feel heavy, almost locked in place. His palms stayed on the glass, but now the skin looked wrong. Too thin. Too pale. She could almost see the faint outline of bone beneath it. Then she noticed something even worse. There was moisture on the inside of the glass where his hand pressed. But Daniel was still outside. For a few moments, Daniel didn't move. His pale hand stayed pressed against the glass, his dark eyes locked on hers. Then his voice changed. "Laura." It was deeper now, colder, a voice that felt like it didn't belong to him. "You're my sister," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "You owe me." Her stomach turned. Daniel had never spoken to her like that before. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a warning. She took another step back, her hands trembling. "You're not Daniel," she whispered. His smile vanished. The skin around his eyes seemed to darken, and his pupils grew so large they almost swallowed the whites. "You buried me," he said, his tone sharp, almost accusing. "You left me there. Alone." Laura's knees felt weak. Her mind was screaming at her to run, to hide, but her body was locked in place. "I didn't want you to die," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not supposed to be here." Daniel leaned closer until his lips nearly touched the glass. "I'm here because of you. And if you don't let me in." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "I'll come in anyway." A shiver ran through her entire body. His hand slid slowly down the glass with a squeal, leaving a trail of dark, greasy smears behind. For the first time since the knocking began, Laura realized the door lock might not be enough. The silence that followed was worse than his words. Laura stood frozen, her eyes on the door, her ears straining for any sound. Then click. Her stomach clenched. The door handle began to move, slowly, deliberately, twisting back and forth as if someone was testing the lock. Laura's breath quickened. She stepped back, her hands searching blindly for her phone on the coffee table. She grabbed it and pressed the screen. Nothing. No light. No signal. It was completely dead. "Daniel, stop," she shouted, but her voice cracked halfway through. From outside, his tone was almost playful now. "You never used to lock the door for me." The handle stopped moving for a moment. Then she heard a faint, steady tapping against the wood, like fingernails drumming in a slow rhythm. Laura's eyes darted toward the windows. The curtains swayed slightly, but there was no breeze. "Let me in," he said softly, almost in a sing-song tone. "I'm tired of waiting out here." Her heart slammed in her chest. She backed into the hallway, never taking her eyes off the door. Then the tapping stopped. The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. She couldn't hear his footsteps, couldn't see his shadow, just the still, dark outline of the door. And then 3 heavy knocks shook the wood so hard it rattled in the frame. Laura gasped and stumbled backward. When she looked again, Daniel wasn't at the door. Laura's chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. The hallway felt colder now, like the air had been drained of warmth. She stepped closer to the window, careful to keep her distance from the door. Peering through the curtain, she saw nothing. The porch was empty. The street beyond was silent and still, the streetlight flickering faintly. Her eyes darted side to side, searching for any sign of movement. Then she spotted something, faint dark patches on the concrete. She squinted. They weren't shadows. They were wet footprints. They started at the front door and trailed away down the path toward the street. Laura's pulse pounded in her ears. She followed the trail with her eyes, but it faded into the darkness just beyond the streetlight's reach. A wave of uneasy relief washed over her. Maybe he was gone. Maybe the nightmare was over. She leaned her forehead against the wall, trying to slow her breathing. But then she remembered something. She hadn't heard footsteps. Not once. The silence was wrong. Too heavy. And then, from the far end of the hallway, behind her, came a single, wet squelch, like a bare foot pressing into the carpet. Laura spun around toward the sound, her breath catching in her throat. The hallway stretched out in front of her, dark and empty. She stood completely still, straining to hear. No more footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. After what felt like hours, she forced herself to move, backing toward the living room and keeping her eyes on the hallway. She didn't sleep the rest of the night, too afraid to close her eyes. When the first pale light of morning crept through the curtains, Laura finally dared to approach the front door. Her hands shook as she unlocked it and pulled it open. The porch was quiet, bathed in cold daylight. But right in the center of the doorstep lay a small, dirt-stained envelope. She crouched down, her stomach knotting. The paper felt damp in her fingers, the edges soft like it had been buried underground. Inside was a single photograph. Her heart stopped. It was a picture of her, standing at the window last night, staring out into the dark. And beside her in the reflection of the glass was Daniel. The photo had been taken from outside. Her fingers went numb, and the picture slipped to the floor. Somewhere far down the street, she thought she heard that same slow, deliberate knock, echoing toward her house again.